I'm about to tell you an amazing story, a true story, a historical tale brought back from the ancient records of a brave young woman, 15 years old, named Blandina. Let's go back in time and talk about this amazing teenage girl that had faith that inspired so many and was a legend in her own time. First of all, let's talk about where she was from. She was in the Roman Empire in Lyon, France. She was born in 162 AD, so in the first century. And by the time 177, she had given her heart to the Lord, probably at the urging or at the inspiration of her mistress. You see, Blandina was a young slave girl. Her life wasn't worth much in Roman times, because first of all, she was a woman. When a woman was born in those days, any woman or any girl child was born, they would lay her at her father's feet, even if he was a rich nobleman, and they would ask him like thumbs up or thumbs down. Thumbs up means they get to keep the girl. Thumbs down means leave the baby girl to die of neglect, or throw her over a cliff, or throw her in the sea. And this was a commonplace sacrifice done to the gods in hopes that the next child would be a boy. You would see the patriarchal hierarchy that was in place at the time of Blandina. But she was not even as privileged enough to have maybe even know who her father was. She was a girl, and in those times, the life of a girl was about the same as the life of a cattle or a livestock or an animal. So her life as a slave girl didn't amount to much. But when she gave her heart to the Lord, she became something of great worth. So at 177, we know that she was arrested. She belonged to a band of people who were martyred in 177. And they had some of the most grueling tortures that we have on record. In Lyon, France, there was a temporary ruler, a ruler named Marcus Aurelius, and he was very cruel. And we know that there was a letter from Eusebius, who was a noted historian. About 100 years later, he recorded the story, because the story was lived in infamy in the town of Lyon, about this amazing little girl, Blandina. First of all, when they were arrested, her mistress was so worried for Blandina. She was such a frail, small little girl, and she doubted two things. She doubted that her faith would carry her through. There had been 10 other people arrested that were Christians right before Blandina had been arrested, and all of them had denied Christ. And it was a great triumph for the pagans, because they brought these people into the arena, and they all were provoked to, all right, now renounce Christ, and 10 of them did. So this was a time where she was afraid that Blandina would not be able to stand up against the executors and the persecutors in this time, because there was great torture and persecution ahead of them. They knew that when they were arrested. The Christians were arrested. Why? Because they were falsely accused of a couple things. And you're going to see a pattern in some of these early church martyrs. The two lies that were told on Christians, the main lies that were told were that they were incestuous. This was a rumor that was twisted out of the fact that early Christians called each other brother and sister. And so sometimes if you're married to your husband, you would call him brother, and likewise. So that was a twisted way. It became a rumor that there was incest in the church. The second thing that was a twisted rumor was when we take communion, we ask the Lord to bless his body and his blood. And they took this as literal eating flesh and drinking blood, which was rich because most pagans actually did do this and sacrificed humans. So, of course, Christians only do it in the spiritual realm, and we ask the Lord to bless bread as his body and wine as his blood, and it was a completely unfounded rumor. So this is why the public was so virally would get excited to persecute Christians. So what brought this on? Well, while this evil ruler was in place, this young man who was renowned, who was well known, who was wealthy, who was handsome, apparently looks were very important back then, because a lot of these martyrs that I'm going to tell you about, there was a lot of commentary on their physical appearance. And this young man named Vedius Apagathus, he was a handsome young man who was prominent in Roman society, and he became a Christian, and he began to be very vocal in the Senate, in the hierarchy of government, and he became an amazing debater on Christianity. Well, of course, the city became so angry, the powers that be became so angry that this prominent young man would give himself to Christ, that he was the first one in Lyon to give his life to receive the crown of immortality as a martyr in Lyon, France. So here we go. Blandina was taken in custody soon after with her master. And again, they were afraid that she wouldn't be able to stand up against, first of all, for her young Christianity, and secondly, she was so small and tiny and frail, and they just didn't think she would be able to stand up against the executioners. So when she was brought into the arena, they sent their best executioners out there to have a big display for the day, and surprisingly, many of the Christians were killed, and one stood who had not died or succumbed to the cruel tortures that they brought upon her. Her body was broken, her body was open. And the executioners at the end of the day said, "We're exhausted. We can do no more." And they took Blandina, at the crowd's screams and hoots and hollers, back into the prison for the night. So the next day, they brought her before the executioners again. And this reminds me of the bravery of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Even though that they were thrown into the fiery furnace, they were young, they were teenagers. They did not flinch in the face of the torture. They did not bow. And in the same way, Blandina had relentless faith, and she was strong and there's no way that this young little girl, this child who's frail and in every way, could have stood up against what she endured. It had to be God through her. This child must have had amazing faith. And it reminds me that, if we have that childlike faith, God really honors that. So the next day, they brought her back into the amphitheater of the Three Gauls in Lyon, which still, there are still relics there in Lyon of the torture devices that were used in the days of Blandina. And there was a 15-year-old boy, and his name was Ponticus. And so they brought this young martyr out, this young boy, and they tortured him in front of Blandina to try to get her to relent, to denounce her faith. And once again, she didn't renounce it, but she instead knelt down on her knees and began to pray passionately, not only for Ponticus, but for her captors and for the executioners, that God would pierce their hearts, and that the love of God would change their hearts. So after that, they put her on a stake, and they hung her on this stake, and they brought out all the wild beasts one by one that they could. While Blandina's response was this: she put her arms and stretched them wide in the form of a cross, and she firmly prayed. She began to sing. She began to worship the Lord in the middle of the arena. and she inspired the combatants with zeal. So it angered them, right? So they wanted to torture her more. They tried harder to kill her, and they could not. She stood in the middle of the arena, tied to a stake with her arms stretched wide to bring glory to Christ. And no doubt she thought about the apostle Peter and how he had been crucified upside down. No doubt she thought of Psalms 27 and Psalm 91. Miraculously, after they released wild beast after wild beast, now I'm talking about they would have cheetahs, leopards, lions, bears, and then heifers and cattle. I mean, everything they could, they pulled out all the stops. Not one of them touched her. They would not go into the middle of the arena, even though they were, shooing them toward her. They were bribing them with food to come toward her. They would not touch her. So another night, she goes back into prison. So now the crowds are ripped into a frenzy. And so they all came back the next day. So she was small and weak, but she was strong in the spirit. They brought her out another day. And we don't know exactly how many days she was brought into the arena, but we know it was several days. So they tried to get her to recant again and again. The last thing they had done with her body broken and open, and she had exhausted all the executioners, they put her and several of her other people that they thought she was acquainted with in her church, or in the people that she worshiped the Lord with, and they put them on a grate, a red hot grate from the fire. And it was literally, they had a human barbecue. And they did it enough to drive out their life. So they scourged her first. So she was beaten and scourged, and they put her on the red hot grate. So on this day, she still didn't die. The last thing they did was they threw her before a wild steer. They wrapped her in a net, and a wild steer was running around the arena, and they threw her onto its horns, and it tossed her in the air, and she still didn't die. So one of the gladiators came out with a dagger and killed her in the end. They burned her body, and they threw her remains into the Tiber River. And you're going to hear about the Tiber River in the next Shero of the faith I tell you about, Eugenia. This reminds me and brings to mind Hebrews 11:35-38. Women received their loved ones back from the dead. Others were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. What it means there about sheepskin and goatskins is that they would take Christians into the arena, and they would put them on their hands and knees and told them to act like sheep, and they would put sheep and goatskins over them and turn loose wolves and lions to eat and kill them, while the people laughed and mocked them. Saints of God, there's a great faith that we must tap into for this last days. Are we worthy to stand with these great martyrs that have gone on before us? I pray your faith be strong. I pray that in this last day, we are people of great faith, that we, even in this time of comfort, this time where we can preach the gospel anywhere we want, we can tell everybody about the Lord, that we will become bolder, that we will be like these martyrs that Eusebius reported that through all these things, all these martyrs that were martyred in Lyon, France during this season, that they only cried out the words they repeated all along. They declared their faith in God, and that they were worshipers of Jesus, that they were God-fearers. So let us fear the Lord. Let us return to the fear of the Lord. Let us return to the place where we want to please God with our life, and even, if necessary, in our death. Blandina, as with so many other early Christian martyrs, she was, despite being frail and weak, she was strong in her faith. She prevailed against her persecutors, against her entire town, and against the entire city. She watched the people that she loved, this little 15-year-old slave girl, watched the people that she loved murdered, tortured one by one. Yet she stood in the middle of that arena, or dropped to her knees and cried out and prayed for their strength time and time again. And she won the crown of immortality. Let's believe, God, that all of us will prove to be strong in our faith in these last and evil days, and that we will stand for God, not only alone, but for one another, being faithful to the cause of Christ. I hope you're blessed by this series of Sheroes of the Faith. There's so many more to come. I'm so excited to tell you about many other women that you may have never heard of. So if you enjoyed this and this has been a blessing to you, like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And I pray you be blessed today. And I pray the Spirit of the Lord be bold and strong in you in everything that you do. Shalom.